March the 27th, I'm Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the Big Pain in the Ass, aka the Nuclear Proctologist.org. And we are here to go to work for you and the species on this planet. You should join us. Come on over to the winning team. All 5 of them. Look at them. Warriors. Warriors. I mean 4. So I got a poll. Should nuclear power plants be labeled as biological weapons, and biological weapons, aka of mass destruction? And we got an overwhelming 100% yes. Some music's just too good to stop. Unfortunately, we got to beat on nuclear for a bit. We'll get back to it. Okay, so try wrapping your mind around what I'm going to show you. La la la. And so I apologize, I'm a couple of minutes late. That was not my fault though. It was due to my external computer crashing, so excuse me while I get up to speed again. Okay, so Reactor 1, as we learned last night from Harvard University, 3 sieverts will kill you in about 2 weeks' time. Unless you stay there for 20 minutes, it'll kill you right then. So you had Reactor 1 melted down, like power plants, and the fuel pools. Number 2 was what prompted TEPCO to discuss evacuating Fukushima workers. It burnt continuously for several days. But there's more to the story. There was 2 reactor buildings that are 1,440 tons of reactor cores versus Chernobyl 200 tons of graphite. These are pure uranium and plutonium, and even worse, one of them was what's known as reclaimed uranium plutonium that has already gone through a chain reaction. Okay. The exhaust stacks were so high, they were lethal, double the lethal doses, just walking past them. So how bad was these buildings? This is Reactor 3. Reactor 3. And there was one more reactor. It was known as Reactor 4. So these really stand out because when you look at it, there's nothing left. It's a stump, right? And a stump, the guts hanging out. Reactor 2 looks like it's intact, but that amount of gas, if you filled up a McDonald's restaurant with that gas, was airtight, everybody that walked in it for 1,000,000 years would die. And it's the isotopes that are in the gas, so they float away and they're still lethal to all species. So you got Reactor 1, Reactor 2, Reactor 3, Reactor 4. They also had these 2 red depictions. You see, these are fuel pools, decades of reactor cores. Okay. So now for the punchline. Music, please. Music, we don't need no stinking music, Dana. This is the internet. The internet doesn't need music. I said music. Okay, so this is a 16-day model of those 4 reactor buildings. The plume dispersal. As you can see, it's right around the entire planet. So coal, oil, and gas doesn't have those attributes. It doesn't cause plumes that covers the planet. Anything does that is man-made radiation. And the reason it works that way is because the radioactive fallout. Here's another model of the plutonium covering the planet. So the radioactive fallout, these little particles, they're pulsing energy. They're like little nuclear engines. So they'll do it every second, some of them for hundreds of millions of years and billions of years, where they'll just pulse energy every second in every direction at almost the speed of light. Pure energy. All fuel pools worldwide are releasing these at an extraordinary amount. These are genocide machines. I know this sounds like a strong word to those uninitiated, but these are genocide machines. The slower you spread the dose, the more effective it produces cancers and inherited defects. And Japan is going the very best way in the world for destroying the human race. Can't do that without destroying all the other species. Okay, so coal, oil, and gas emissions don't pulse energy for millions of years every second. They don't make plumes that cover your country, let alone your planet. And radiation covers your planet in 16 days because each radioactive isotope, atom you see there with an isotope, is pulsing energy. So its own little nuclear engine is able to suspend itself. Physically, it moves itself because it's so tiny. You can put 200 million on top of a needle, but you can't see them. So when you see dust in your room on a sunny day, they're smaller than that. So they're very good at suspending themselves, and therefore they're very mobile, and they're easily uptake into plants and humans and animals and mammals and birds and insects. It's a disaster of all of humanity. So when your coal plant breaks down, you're not going to hear somebody say, "This is a disaster of all of humanity. It's bigger than anything we can cope with." If your oil plant breaks down, you're not going to hear words like on TV warns of an apocalyptic scenario because your gas plant broke down. This could one day be considered the ultimate catastrophe of the world and the planet. You're not going to hear that when your oil plants break down, okay? They're not going to come out and show you plumes of the carbon dispersal from your coal plant blowing up, or your gas plant or your oil plant, all right? These are biological weapons of mass destruction. That's what nuclear is. That's what you're looking at, biological weapons of mass destruction with a stranglehold on the most important influential countries worldwide. We have 16 votes, 100% of people agree that nuclear power plants should be labeled as biological weapons of mass destruction. And people that promote them should be labeled as terrorists. They found plutonium in every sample and paved surfaces. Well, guess what? This is a model of neptunium radioactive fallout. That decays to plutonium, by the way, 239, and that's the worst one. And this is an actual plutonium-239 dispersal from TEPCO's data. And plutonium was named after the devil, by the way, because it's so insidious. I'm just trying to get you so you can appreciate the rest of the news stories we're going to cover. Experts agree species of wildlife and fishes are endangered globally due to nuclear fallout. When your coal plant, oil plant, gas plant breaks down, you're not going to hear headlines saying deteriorating plant threatens mass extinction around the world. Okay? All right? I'm only telling you 500 more times. When your gas plant blows up, you're not going to hear nuclear engineers say, "I can agree, your gas plant can be an extinction event for our planet." You don't put 100 sirens around your gas, oil, and coal plants so people can run away and scream and take iodine tablets and pray for deliverance. Fukushima radioactive fallout, though, is actual global warming. So is weapons fallout. So is all the fuel pools hemorrhaging worldwide. So if you've done a model So just imagine this model, instead of being Fukushima, as a fuel pool, releasing a plume of radiation. This model would say be based on 20 days, but the fuel pools are good for 50, 60 years of doing it. So imagine 1,000 fuel pools worldwide releasing radiation all day, every day. Instead of splitting the atoms to boil the water to power millions of homes, the fuel pools now are still splitting the atoms, but they're released into the environment. This is what it should look like. Imagine 1,000 of them doing that. It's time to gut up. It's time to stop this. You got to stop this. You have to end this. You got to come up with some solutions. But you can't do it until you have a conversation. You got to come up with solutions for this. You got to get the fuel out of the environment. I'm just saying. You better get it together. By the way, this model over to your left is not model, it's study. Study of atoms. Of 220 million atoms of just iodine-129 per liter. You can't have that without there being exact same amount of iodine-133. You can't have either one of them, though, without having 1/30th, 20 million atoms of iodine-131. When you put this all together, this is just a fraction of the isotopes. When you extrapolate the actual numbers in these plumes, all the species were sucking up the radiation, not just into their body, but their thyroids. And it's such a big number, it converts it into radioactive hormones. So it wrecks all the future generations. It's a slow kill, slow extermination, but eventually it starts accelerating because there's less species to exterminate. Guess at what stage we're at? Miko Kaku, human civilization may destroy itself. He's not going to talk about coal plants. He's not going to talk about oil plants. He's not going to talk about carbon. He's not going to talk about gas plants. He's going to talk about just a couple of nuclear reactors melting down. Just a couple. By the way, if you have a solar flare, you lose power worldwide. Every nuclear power plant will melt down at the same time. And within a week, all the fuel pools will be gone. It'll be too toxic for anything to survive. By the way, nuclear fallout is described as a billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Nobel Prize winner on NHK, major scumbag media in Japan. The only way to preserve the human life is to completely turn away from nuclear power. Not coal, not oil, not gas. Do you really think all of those people were confused? They were confused, Dana. They weren't pro-nuclear. Major U.S. paper, time to quit nuclear power altogether, threatens the very existence of human civilization. Not coal, not gas, not oil. All will be lost. This is the reality of nuclear energy. Not coal, not gas, not oil. Coal, gas, and oil, no. Nuclear power is the only invention that may destroy the future of humans. You can't destroy the future of humans without destroying all the species first. You can ignore what I'm telling you. You can ignore all the evidence all you want, but that doesn't make it not so. That we're not doing this because it's fun, okay? There's nothing fun about doing what I'm doing. There's nothing easy about it either on top of that. I can't do a radio show because I can't educate the population with a radio show. You got to work 10 times, 20 times harder to bring you the documentation. Japan's ambassador writes to the UN Secretary General, and I despise with every fiber of my body the UN, by the way. It is no exaggeration to say the fate of Japan and the entire world depends on a single building. But hey, let's all pretend it's not happening. Let's blame it on carbon. It's radiation that is your enemy. And it's going to be now for millions and billions of years, because nothing on the planet with replicating cells is able to defend against it. We don't have autoimmune trigger. We may not be able to live in Japan someday, not because of coal, oil, and gas, bird brains out there that are regurgitating that. No offense. But radiation is going to be flowing. You know, in the first year, there was 865,000 extra cancers, which is just one of 1,800 illnesses you got to worry about. That should be comforting for everybody. How about this one? 6 in 10 Fukushima children have diabetes. The Tokyo Area Medical Clinic, we're expecting diabetes. Inhaling the particle for insects and animals and birds and mammals, and humans and children, your loved ones, your friends, your families, your aunts, your uncles, your parents, increases exposure by a factor of trillion. So imagine when you put a limit on food and you eat that food regular, that's bioaccumulation. It's the easiest, it's a death cult. They've taken over. Now they've just gone incredibly evil and like on a whole different scale. Let's get after it, I suppose, because I got a big list there. We'll never get through it, unfortunately. Oh, and just for fun, if you look up nuclear power plants, look for a aerial shot or high shot. And almost all plants are surrounded by farms because they love you so much. I want to turn you all into Spider-Man and the Hulks. Okay, so nuclear whistleblower. You're not going to hear coal whistleblower, oil whistleblower, gas whistleblower, protecting the public from disaster. Netflix got a new documentary released this spring. Let me get that fixed, get it together. A new Netflix documentary, 3 Mile Island, traced how brazen nuclear safety violations in the 3 Mile cleanup threatened a full meltdown that would have taken out the East Coast. There was a serious plume released from there, right? They didn't evacuate people because they didn't want to cause panic. And so eventually they said evacuate. A few days later they said evacuate women, pregnant women, and children. Not women. Women are supposed to be protected of all species from nuclear. That's the number one priority we should all have in our lives. It was prevented only because the top 3 engineers leading the cleanup process blew the whistle. What? Ernie Gunnarsson, Lake Barrett? Tell me you're not going to be putting them into a documentary, Netflix. I'm warning you right now, Netflix. You put out a documentary with Lake Barrett and Ernie Gunnarsson as heroes, I'm on my way down to your office. Block government bonus payments for a speedy cleanup. By the way, what they didn't tell you, the pet deaths after people ran away and left their pets behind, over the next month or so, the pets were all dying. There was reports of enormous increase in cancers and infant mortality rates. Birds disappeared. Mutations. Insider in charge of monitoring radiation at 3 Mile Island says the radiation release was up to thousands of times higher than the government emits. We got to add another 3 to 16 zeros onto that one, don't we? So they sprayed water over the reactor core and they pumped some of it, a fraction of it, was sucked up for testing. This stuff was kept in containers. They done this until they had 2.3 million gallons, which meant hundreds of billions was washed out into Pennsylvania Susquehanna River. So when people stopped paying attention a few years later, they boiled that off over several years You're talking about lethal doses by the gallon was boiled off into the community. If there was, it's not illegal to poison, you see, and Congress and parliaments worldwide don't have the authority to make it illegal. The only people that has the authority is the International Atomic Energy Agency, this shell company of the United Nations, a globalist front of 195 militaries. So they boiled it off over 18 to 24 months. Well, what was it, 18 or 24? The effects on the average person living within 50 miles. So if you boil something off, it's going to travel 50 miles. Like a coal plant, oil plant, or gas plant does. Radiation travels a lot further than 50. But the average person within 50 miles, a 3-mile island, will be less than the amount you receive from watching a year of color television. Now, if we were at a lecture and somebody was trying to say that, I'd have something to say about it, because they got nothing to do with each other. It's surreal that somebody would suggest that radioactive fallout from a nuclear meltdown is equal to color TV. It's not, though, if you're talking about the nuclear industry. It's despicable to say something like that. It's just the lowest of lowest. And it's shocking, really, that the nuclear industry publicly would say something like that. That's how ignorant the population is to nuclear, right? They're so infatuated with the Hulk and Spider-Man and all their favorite industry-created superheroes. Try wrapping your mind around this one. Perspective: why nuclear power is good for public health. You gotta be an incredible lowlife to write that friggin' title. I don't think we've ever seen that before. Well, we did kind of. We see it from people like Michael Schillenberg. Here's some public health. You don't want to buy food from this creepy country called Japan. Half the country was banned in 55 countries worldwide. The radioactive food, from 14 prefectures. Canada lifted all restrictions after 93 days because Canada was captured by the nuclear industries in the 70s. No resistance. Now, generations of inbreeding, we don't have a country, a government, or anything functional. We just have it as a nuclear industry. But try wrapping your mind around growing food right alongside of 1-ton bags of nuclear waste. If you don't understand that that's wrong, there's probably no hope for you. These are disease factories. What you're looking at there is they boil off 1 million gallons of water a minute, 4,500 tons, 4,500 pickup trucks of water a minute. So 1 million gallons, each gallon has 16 glasses of water. Each water has 1 billion creatures. And eggs and larvae and everything else. These are genocide machines. The tall, skinny stacks are releasing radiation constantly. They also have incinerators on these sites, huge incinerators. Because it's legal to create dirty bombs and burn them in the nuclear industry. Nuclear energy is making a big comeback. This is absurd to suggest, by the way. So this is propaganda on a whole different scale. It's been getting renewed attention from the U.S. government. No, from the nuclear industry. The U.S. government couldn't care less. The nuclear industry and policymakers that have 7,500 lobbyists running at them, calling them, Twittering them, Facebooking, emailing them, texting them, knocking on their doors till they get them to vote yes. There is no environmental appeal to nuclear, period. There's zero. It's the most carbon-intensive thing in human history. And its fuel pools have now basically condemned every species on the planet worldwide with the radioactive fallout. Fukushima was the overdrive catalyst that brought it all together. Decades of reactor cores lost. Department of Energy, which is a euphemism for scumbag, recently launched a $6 billion effort. $6 billion to the nuclear industry. Is that some kind of joke? Hanford would just give you the middle finger if you offered him $6 million. Hanford figures they need at least another $700 billion. Or $6 billion. $700 billion to clean up just one site. And cleaning up being get sick and die. They pick it up, put it somewhere else. The rescue a number of civil nuclear power plants slated for mothball because they've been bombarded with neutrons for decades. They're very fragile. Also what's known as brittle. And these are high pressure 1,000, 2,000 psi reactors. So brittle and 2,000 pound reactors is stupid and bad. There goes Feinstein. U.S. Senator Feinstein added her voice to the growing chorus of calls to keep Diablo Canyon running. It's on a fault line, for God's sakes. And multiple fault lines. On June 7th, the president, who skipped his Alzheimer's pills, announced he asked Congress for an additional $4.3 billion to develop domestic-produced low-enriched uranium. They do have fuel processing facilities in the United States. We've covered them. They're dirty, disgusting communities. They just radiate the entire communities with clusters of cancers everywhere. $4.3 billion. 3 years ago, they went through $18 billion trying to create a mixed oxide fuel facility. Remember that? They're now going to do the plutonium pits for bombs there. Savannah River, was it? Like, all of this, like, if you think about 3 Mile Island, you got to remember Santa Susana is 460 times more radiation released from that spot, from a sodium reactor. It's still melting down. They hid it for 50 years, and in that 50 years, over 500,000 people built their homes within 10 miles, right in the smack center of the danger zone. All of this is happening in an international setting characterized by numerous countries wanting to expand nuclear energy, including Japan, the site of the Fukushima Daiichi, 2011. Right, so whoever's writing this has the personality of a shoehorn. Really, they're just regurgitating machines. The pro-nuclear these are the lobbyists, by the way, that wrote this. This was a lobbyist, obviously. You'll figure that out on your own. The pro-nuclear calls have grown steadily in the last few months. That's called a public relation campaign. That's all that is, right? There's no like, they've lost the ability to build the plants, right? They're dependent upon Korea and EDF. That's about it. Russia's no longer in, which is part of the agenda. Quickened by the geopolitical context of the bans on Russia oil and natural gas. All right, so they invaded Chernobyl. Everybody come out and freaked out over Chernobyl. And then the nuclear industry went full steam into defensive mode and promoted nuclear. Oh, nuclear's so clean, it's carbon free. Look at Chernobyl. There's deers and bears and antelopes, migratory animals that pass through there. Therefore, it's perfectly fine, is the narrative. We covered it. These are old sawhorse terms that have been around for about 7 decades. Quick about the geopolitical context, these are the industry, right? They just regurgitate the same narrative in a 10-year cycle. Quickened by the geopolitical context of bans, and we covered all of this. We're conscious, well, we want energy independence from Russia, so we're going to get nuclear. The problem was, what's really going on, of course, is the International Energy Agency had said between 2020 and 2026 that we would bring online in 6 years 5,500 large nuclear power plants worth of renewables into the grid. In other words, 4,800 gigawatts of power in a 6-year period. Last year, despite the fact of costs doubling for everything and delays, it was 333 nuclear power plants worth of renewables came online in just 12 months. Nuclear can't compete with this. The price is free falling, and nuclear is skyrocketing. It can't compete. But the skill is there for renewables, not for... But what they've done is the industry has sabotaged storage. So you can pump hydro and compressed air storage, or just simple storage, and that can be recycled on top of that. If you use pumped hydro, recycled, heavy mineral water, it's heavier water for the volumes, see? And if you use compressed air storage, you're digging tunnels and compressing air down, and you can do it anywhere. It's low pressure, less than 120 psi, and you store your energy. But if you went geothermal, 24 hours a day energy, tidal zone, 24 hours a day energy, backed up by wind and solar, which was backed up by compressed air and pumped hydro storage, that's the end of nuclear, coal, oil, and gas per se for the majority of the planet in a short order. And there's other technologies that are available, but they're being scuttled by the scumbag, degenerate nuclear industry that is in key positions in media and universities and governments, and captured the regulatory agencies. Quickened by the geopolitical context of bans on Russia. That was an agenda, and Putin was in with it. If you go look at the world young leaders, young global leaders at World Economic Forums, most of the players today were at those forums when they were very young, including Bill Gates and Vladimir Putin and Justin Scumbag Trudeau Castro. One key counter example is famous anti-nuclear Germany. Famously anti-nuclear Germany. Famously anti-nuclear. Again, these are controlled oppositions that where they bring in these narratives, which is scrambling to replace the politically unacceptable Russian natural gas it can no longer import by bringing shuttered coal burning plants back online. So again, coal burning plants. Coal, if you don't put the plants in your community, you'll never have a problem with them. Like the fallout doesn't go very far from coal. But to put them in your city to drive you insane and make you sick. Probably lobbied by the pharmaceutical industry on top of that. The embrace of new nuclear plants is often backed by a simple environmental and social justice argument. Nuclear currently supplies 20% of America's total electricity. I'm surprised they didn't put the word carbon there, carbon-free. Actually, they claim it's 52% of emission-free electricity. They did put it there. Again, this is absurdness in overdrive to suggest that nuclear is emission-free. It's constantly hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. But the whole process, just to build a site, just the amount of people that have to drive there every day. Like, you can't have any kind of massive power generation without some kind of impact. It simply can't exist. But what they done was they constructed a narrative in 2015. They advanced it through 195 military countries. George Bush Sr. called them the New World Order, was United Nations, right? If you go look up George Bush I can play the clip, I suppose, because you're not going to look it up, are you? Tell the truth. You're not going to look it up. You know it. I know it. Hang on. Here, Georgie. I'm going to adjust the volume, hopefully. He's going to call the United Nations the New World Order.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
So, United Nations is, according to George Bush Sr., many, many others, the New World Order. Let's give Kevin Blanchett a call. How's Kevin doing? Let's give Kevin a call. Let's give Kevin to give us an update. Hi, everybody. Pick up the phone, Kevin. Kevin probably still don't got my number punched in there. Contacts. Let's bring Kevin in for 5 or 10 minutes. See what I got to say. Kevin B. There we be. You got to duck out for a second, Kevin.
Hello.
Hey, Kevin, it's Dana.
Oh, how's it going, Dana?
Can we get you on the show for a bit?
Yeah, hold on. I'm having so many phone issues you don't even know. I got more issues than...
Well, you're live. Go ahead, do your thing. Kevin will be back in a second.
I'm here.
Okay. Has Kevin, are you looking on the beaches on the coastline at all lately or today?
Yeah, I'm going here in the next few days.
And what part of the coastline are we talking about, Kevin?
So what's going on? Point Loma is the most famous typo in SoCal, according to them. It's been closed for 2.5 years, so no one's been in. And they've been trying to get rid of foot traffic in there, including me. They get millions of tourists. It's been closed for 2.5 years. It's reopened, and the first low tide is here in early July. So it'll be a historic footage. It opened last month, but we had some low tide, but it was at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So they don't let anybody in till 9:30. But we're going to have low tide in the afternoon, and so I'll get in there. So it'll be historic footage. It'll be really powerful stuff, to see, because there's been nobody in there nobody for 2.5 years. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be fantastic.
Me too.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I can't wait to see what happens.
So much of my footage is historic footage, It's like yours was up there, and they try to squash us. They try to just ignore us. That's the whole thing with you and I, Dana, is the whole around that Kettling one, they squash us down. But the thing is, people don't want, now that when this was hypothesis by you and I, that all this was going to happen, everybody's like, ooh,
Yeah.
Self-fulfilling prophecy. But when it happened, these people can't handle the truth. They're not strong enough. I talk to people, and it's just like they're afraid of it, and they know it's true. They'll say, yeah, we know about Fukushima, but I can't deal with it because they're too weak. That's why, another reason why our view count is so low. People can't handle this truth. It's too hard for them. It takes a pretty strong person to understand, to recognize the reality of this nightmare.
It does, and I generally target countries and policymakers and the pro-nuclear students and stuff like that are thinking about getting into nuclear. That's but you know, I'm trying to tell the story, right? And
you're the professor. You're the professor. You do a fantastic work.
I'm the bastard. Is more like it.
I awarded you a PhD, so I'm the peer review, so you have one.
I've been doing it long enough. I thank you, Kevin. I've been doing it long enough.
Yeah.
So you're. Go ahead, Kevin. I'm sorry.
So here's the thing. You know, people don't want to handle the truth, and it's like that clips you were playing yesterday. They were so fantastic. That professor that you had on there, plasma physicist, I used to talk to that guy, to him, back and forth in those early days. He was on this. He was all over it. And
Gordon Thompson, folks. Yeah.
And Harvard squashed him down. But he was talking.
He 100%. He did put out some good stuff. He did. His whole demeanor showed he wasn't impressed with. He didn't feel comfortable. He didn't feel comfortable.
He wanted to tell the truth, but the problem is,
he can't.
I'm a professor. I come from a really powerful school. If you stand up to these guys, you're done. You're going to end up like me, broke, busted, disgusted, and they all know that. Not only that, they don't just, fire you and get rid of you and cut off your money. They freaking slander you. They blackball you. They go after you. And that's an unarguable fact. This is the power that the nuclear industry has inside of academia. They control it, and they're vicious. And people are afraid of them.
Yeah, they're the inbreeds of the inbreeds, so they're desensitized, right?
They're evil. They're evil, and and they have Price Anderson, all this free money, this pork that flies out. They have political cover on both parties. They have academia, so they can get it. Well, I call them the untouchables, as you know. You look think about what they've been able to do to you and I. If that was any other group of YouTubers on subject matter, there'd be criminal investigations. There'd be congressional hearings. People go to jail. I mean, I was in critical condition when they're slandering me and trolling me and attack. Those are felonies in all 50 states. But they get away with it. What they've done think about there's how many YouTube channels are out there that's 100% specifically just to slander you and I.
Oh, yeah, it's shocking. Shocking, eh?
It is shocking. Nobody else could ever get away with that. Somebody else did that, you'd have state attorney generals, you'd have judges, you'd have lawyers lining up to take them apart.
Well, I called a couple of scumbags out, and they dragged me to court 15 times.
Yeah.
Right? And they done everything they could to destroy me. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what they do. The same people that you call out, they're the same people that troll me, that slander me, and, the nuclear industry funds them. I traced it down. I went to the FBI. We had a bunch of IT people. It was the NEI, the Department of Energy, the United States, our own taxpayer money. They hired teams of trolls. And now it's coming out. It's being exposed in these in this Trump bailout and this Biden bailout that there was money inside those programs to say the Pacific Ocean was good, to promote seafood, and to go after anybody that was saying anything about Fukushima.
Right. Taiwan nuclear industry, the universities, all 2,000 students spammed the internet for the first couple of years as part of their curriculum. Nuclear students out there telling lies. Imagine, folks.
That's not to mention that these are sophisticated trolls that the United States Department of Energy and the NEI and the thing hired.
Yeah. Well, what they done to you is ridiculous. My God, I've never seen anybody censored. Kevin, you're censored. Kevin, not that people don't watch it. You're censored. You're censored. You're censored, man.
I get so many people that walk up to me a day now. I mean, every place I go, oh, Kevin, we love you, man. And I'm like, oh, yeah. But, our old footage is still standing. That's the good thing. A lot of my old videos get more views now than they did when they were new.
I got no old videos. They took all my videos down. Bastards. 1,600. I have several hundred of them backed up, but
okay, because the thing is when you
it doesn't matter, right?
People by individual names, and I think those are story powerful stuff.
Like all those expeditions that were a lot of. It's an absurd amount of energy put in all that, but those expeditions, those videos from those days, They were just incredible videos. You never get.
Boy.
And the dude added just hateful, disgust, book burning. You were calling it when they done it to me,
Not
right?
only that, it's not even hateful and disgusting. It's illegal in my book.
That's right.
It's
Yeah.
criminal. It's not burning down books. You're burning down whole libraries. This is the most important subject matter on the face of the earth.
Oh yeah, no,
These
it's
one
up.
actual photos that you have.
It's really something.
They're so powerful.
It was like it's honest work, right? It's not. We're not deceitful or dishonest or disingenuous. We were honest people, and we go through a lot of trouble to be accurate.
Do you know about the JSTOR? Do you know about that in academia? So in the 90s, you used to be able to put your PhDs out there. You know, everybody, you could go online, find you go dig through a research library. MIT Media Lab captured all the PhDs, and you have to buy them now. And if it's sensitive,
Right.
you can't even buy them. That's what Aaron Swartz was doing when he was downloading.
That's
He
right.
downloaded the server at MIT.
He had 4.5 million studies downloaded. That's what, right? Aaron Swartz. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I used to tell people simple, like at the university. I'm there every day, and everybody knows it. I'm like, it's real simple. You hide your PhD because it's a bunch of bullshit, and it's not a real PhD. I put mine online. You put yours online. You know, a traditional PhD is simple. You first you hypothesize the knowledge. Then you have to do at least 4.5 years of field work. Then you defend your new knowledge. And if you're right, it becomes the knowledge. That's a true PhD. That's what you did. That's what I did. You know, I call it plutonium theory. But everything that we said in the early days, you know, we took a lot of risk.
Yeah, and everything was worse than what we said, predicted it too, on top of that.
We took a lot of risk, but we were right.
Yeah,
The
we,
bottom line is
unfortunately,
we were
yeah.
right. I consider them to be the greatest PhDs in human history. This
Yeah.
is just the greatest subject matter in human
It
history.
is
that's all.
it is 100% unequivocally the most important topic, current, past, and present. This is such a like we can't come up with solutions until we admit we got a problem, and
That's it.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, look, we're afraid of nuclear meltdowns. You're afraid of them. You know, for the first 3-4, it took me a year and a half to convince anybody they were even one. And now we know they're meltdowns, so you can't go there like you
No,
used to go.
Kevin,
Kevin,
Kevin, that's a good point, folks. For the first couple of years, and I got a lot of clips of the experts refusing to acknowledge that the plants had melted down. We have a lot of headlines to back that up on top of that. Go ahead, Kevin. That was such an important point.
Arnie Gundersill was inside my site every day for the first 3 weeks, telling me, Kevin, they're not meltdowns. I said, yes, they are. I wrote a PhD. I did my master's thesis on Mach 1, Mach 2s. You know, Utah Construction is, they built them. And I knew they couldn't handle anything over a 7.8, the cores. And I knew that the spent fuel pools couldn't handle anything over about a 7.8. This was a 9. I knew they were gone immediately. I knew it, unarguably. And so Gundersill's telling me it's a hydrogen blast for weeks. They all stayed with the hydrogen blast narrative.
Yeah,
so,
he's such a lowlife. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, so here's the thing.
He's talking about Arnie Gunderson, folks. Did you get cut off, Kevin?
No, I'm here. So here's the thing. The bottom line is this. Those guys branded themselves in history. We were right, they were wrong.
Yep.
And it matters.
It matters.
You know, they were full blown out melt. So I tell all these professors, I run into them daily, and I'm like, oh, so we're afraid of nuclear meltdowns until they happen. And when they happen, the answer is just to ignore them. See no nuclear evil, speak no nuclear. That's what you've done. That's what the Trump administration, the Biden administration, the Obama administration. I mean, Obama lied in the early days, so I'll keep you informed on March 17th in the Rose Garden.
So,
I have those clips.
So, Kevin.
But the bottom line is they just ignored it. They didn't mention it. They still don't mention it. They're just like acting like, you know, I always say the nuclear energy emperor has no fucking clothes.
Kevin.
That's exactly what it is.
Like, let me bring you back to the growing of food in Japan. They never stopped growing it. And then Canada lifted all restrictions after 93 days, but 55 countries had it banned. And these were the exporting countries. And so Canada's lost. It's a lost country because the nuclear industry was able to do something like that, poison the entire population.
Same with the United States. Same with the United States. Remember Hillary Clinton's early thing? We're going to let all the food in?
Yeah.
You know, most of the world still has it all banned. But the problem is this. The problem is pushed into the ocean for so long, and the jet stream moves left to right, and fish swim. So the fish being caught all over the world. So it really doesn't matter now. It's all contaminated.
It is, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so it's like the grain embargo that's going on in Ukraine. Come on, that grain is so poisonous. That grain's blooming right at freaking Chernobyl. So, I mean, it's outrageous. People just kind of forget. Well, they don't want to know. But the fish, there was a fish caught this year in January by the Northern Alliance fishermen that tested freaking 100 times. They had, I think it had something like 114 sieverts of cesium-137 and in its flesh. Over 100 times over the raise limits. That was this year.
Yeah. What they got done is we can't let them get away with it, basically. Unfortunately.
No, so the thing is the jet stream, we know that the salmon that returned to Alaska and returned to Colombia, it's been tracked. A lot of them are clear over there on the Russian-Japanese coast. I mean, so the bottom line is you can't eat fish.
You can't.
You know, people that do it out of their mind.
Well, like what we seen was an extinction event down on the Pacific Ocean. You got it all the way to the American side. I got it all the way on the Canadian side. Then it has to be the same everywhere else. It can't just be that part of the ocean. That's a huge chunk of the ocean, obviously.
I've talked to plenty of people in Mexico. I've talked to plenty of people down all the way down the coast. Same thing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've been on those tide pools my whole life. I grew up on those tide pools. I grew up right at, at PB Point. I've been looking at those tide pools since I was a little boy. Those things were loaded in 2010.
Oh, yeah, they were.
Immediately.
They were completely, unequivocally full of life. And
now they're dead.
So when you get down there, make sure to call in, Kevin.
I will.
If it gets coordinated at the right time, obviously, right? If you're on boots on the ground, that'd be a great thing, right? It's just such a sad story for me, right? Because I love the ocean. But folks, this trickles into all the other species, humanity. It's just not acceptable, right? That the industry.
No, it's heartbreaking. It pisses me off. I love the ocean. I grew up on the ocean too. You know, I've been on it my whole life.
That's right.
I mean, I'm heartbroken about it. You know, it's just the mother of all life. That's all.
Yeah.
Mighty Blue Lady. We're just going to sit back and watch these.
70% of the planet. 70% of the planet. And the most important thing on the planet, they've done so. They've done so much in so many different places. It's just
like I say it like this: what did the smallest Upper California purple urchin starfish say to the 60,000-pound humpback whale? Fukushima killed my food.
Yeah.
Me too. The plankton feeders. They're plankton feeders, both of them, and they took out the core of life. It took it out, and we have the evidence now because we have the salmon data. The salmon data, we have empirical, so you can run regression in computers, so it's not, it's not opinion anymore. It's concrete knowledge now. But the salmon radically collapsed after 2011. It's unarguable. It's unarguable because we have the data on all the rivers. It's well documented and it's well tracked by me. You can go look at it. They post them every day. And so the salmon collapsed.
Well, they're the last to go. They're the migratory species. And there's a lot of weight put on the salmon species, right? They're important for the killer whales, and they're important for the big bears, and they're important for the seals and sea lions.
The smoking gun is the Chinook did not start to collapse until 2016. In fact, the Chinook had record returns on multiple rivers, including the Columbia in 2010, 2011, 12, 13, 14.
Well, 15. Like the tourist industry, the sports fishing tourist industry is it's massive when it comes to salmon, folks.
Yeah.
Like the people go out and spend 50, 60, 80, hundreds of $1,000s on a boat just to go out and get one or two salmon each year. And they're happy
still do
about
it.
that, right? Yeah, they're still doing it.
Well,
So
that's
it's a
Jim
big
Mark.
it's a
Jim
big
Mark's
deal.
the most famous salmon guide in all of Oregon. He sold off all his gear. He's done. This was a guy that born and raised in Gold Beach, Oregon. He's been a salmon guide since he was a little kid. He's older than I am. And he's like, there ain't any salmon. It's over. And it's Fukushima. And he talks to multiple people, and they all agree. And the officials you talk to them, because I do talk to them, they'll say, you're right, they're dying at sea. Okay, well, we have outliner, we can run regression. So something we know radically happened in 2011. Did a meteor hit? Do we have 1,000 XL on these? That's a tough one to figure out. We know there's an outliner. That's what it's called in statistics and in science. When something radical changes, we call those outliners. And you can run regression, and the outliner unarguably points to 2011. Something radically crazy acutely happened to the Pacific Ocean in 2011.
Well, we also see all the supercell storms since then too, right? Because there was, and these are devastating because we don't have building codes for 200-mile-per-hour winds anywhere on the planet, and that's regularly coming ashore since post-Fukushima. And then that devastates entire cities and communities wherever it comes ashore.
How about the heat bubble right here in the western United States, 2011? The Great Salt Lake, I live on it. It was at normal level in 2011. I was just doing spiral videos today at the university. I'm like, hello, again, just a coincidence. You're going to all chalk the greatest drought in 1,200 years started in 2011.
Right, those forest fires. Because that radioactive fallout, the first thing it does is kills the bacteria and the fungus throughout the forest and the grasslands. And then there's an amazing trickle effect after that.
The heat bubble that's coming off this ocean, they push it in the ocean the entire time. The first 6 days that plume, their answer was push water on. And these storms rise up, and you can draw a line. Remember that map that used to come out of my mouth that I put up in the early days?
Right.
That's exactly what the drought is. The drought's exactly to a T right where, and I put that up in 2011. And so it's no coincidence that people are in denial. I call it the greatest mental illness in human history, Fukushima denial. We're afraid of meltdowns until they happen. And I tell people, you're really telling me there's no consequence for a nuclear meltdown. That's what you're saying. You're telling me there's no... For every action, there's a reaction. This is the greatest action in human history.
Right, gas, oil, and coal don't have any of these attributes, right, Kevin? Kevin? Yeah.
I'm here.
I say gas, coal, and oil. Yeah, gas, coal, and oil doesn't cause problems like this.
No, not like this. And by the way, the answer is the sun. It's been the sun for a long, long time. And by the way, this narrative they put out that there was 410 nuclear reactors worldwide in 2011. We're down to 286.
Is that right?
There's been one put on in China in 20 years, and it had a meltdown in 2018, the fast breeder. In the United States, we had 104. We're down to 68, and that's with all the bailouts. Or we'd be down under 40. So
plants, that's right. Plants, yeah. Okay, well, Kevin...
In the United States for 40 years.
So, go ahead, Kevin.
They put on one reactor in for Watts Bar. It took them 44 years.
Watts Bar
is up to $30 billion in Georgia, and it's still not done.
Yeah.
They've been building up for 30 years.
Okay,
Billions.
you're gonna call in with an update, hopefully, when you get boots on the ground out there, if we catch the right time for you. Hopefully that happens. And you can call anytime to update what you're seeing down there. And like you said, you're going to catch the low tides soon in daytime.
We're going to get really low tides at 3:30 in the afternoon, -2. So that's as low as you'll ever see them. And so it'll be good look all July. So it'll be really a story. It'll be a good time.
I don't know if I'm going to... I don't think I'm going to get out at all this year, and it freaks me out. I'll still try, though. Okay, well, Kevin, thank you again, my friend, for everything you're doing.
Hang in there.
We appreciate it. It's a big deal. God bless. Take care, my friend. It's Kevin Blanche. Kevin, you can find him on YouTube. You can find ways to donate at the top of his site or under his video, or you can contact him. And Kevin's headed down to the tide pools in the Pacific. So we're looking forward to that footage, and hopefully gets a chance to call in. And so the pictures you've been seeing in the background are the coastline of the expeditions I've done where the species are exterminated. The only thing left out there is the salmon, really. And the salmon, of course, is a huge industry for tourism every year. It's massive. It drives economies. I'm just going to get back to where we left off at George Bush, the New World Order. Let's play that again.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
So the UN is the New World Order. That's 195 militaries. Their puppet, one of their major puppets is NATO, which is 31 militaries now, I think. I don't know if they updated their website. But if you go look it up, when you look up NATO, it'll say 30 militaries. That's the big thug on the block, right? So they've taken over most of the planet in the last 70 years. They were created, United Nations, which was created in the dust of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so when you hear the people talking about our hunger for power is only growing, but if you can't handle the job, get out of the way and let somebody that can handle the job. Right? And so, but their solution is to destroy everybody, and they don't have to come up with solutions. Because it's easier to destroy everybody than it is to come up with solutions for them. The emerging global argument in support of nuclear energy, the emerging, which is an agenda. Considering America's the world's energy needs this century, we should not only maintain our nuclear power footprint, we need to expand the number of nuclear plants, cut fossil fuel emissions, and reap the climate benefits. And of course, nuclear is the climate change. Gas doesn't cause climate change. Oil and coal can't can't cause it. Nuclear power will save American lives. This is a Freudian argument. There's so many holes in it. There's endless holes in it. Nuclear is the opposite. It's the big bully, and it won't go away. It won't let any other energy source come into play. Anything that threatens it is under siege for the remainder of their lives. But there's another compelling reason for expanding nuclear power, a public health argument you almost never heard anything about. You almost never heard anything about. In other words, get ready for another song and dance. The pollution from the combustion of fossil fuel biofuels, which count as renewables, which is not supposed to, by the way, even though they produce greenhouse gases. The greenhouse gases is nuclear. Again, the word greenhouse gases, when they start using that, then they don't have a legitimate argument. Because nuclear is the only thing that creates greenhouse gases. In the case of wood chips, take decades and centuries to be renewed. Detrimental to the human health. The second argument in favor of expanding nuclear, even simpler. Nuclear power will save American lives. Again, this is desperation, these types of arguments. It's pure desperation. It's panic. Again, we see them panicking when they're writing, the nuclear lobbyists are writing these stories. This is actually emblematic of panic. Now comes the hardest part, convincing the American public. It's not hard if you're honest, because people recognize it. It's only hard if you're trying to trick them and deceive them and manipulate them, which is what they're doing. While her support for Diablo Canyon is a massive positive development, time about Dianne Feinstein, Senator. Feinstein's recent co-op Go ahead. Is a typical example of how pro-environmental politicians portray nuclear energy as a stopgap way to give renewables like wind and solar or geothermal time to catch up to the point where they could replace coal. Well, again, right, refusing to adapt to the facts. So geothermal and tidal energy is 24 hours a day energy. But you back it up with wind and solar and compressed air storage or pumped hydro storage, and whatever other technology is available and shows up. And this is not rocket science. This is obsolete technology, and they're refusing to acknowledge it even exists for the most part. Right? Because they give you the wind, solar, and geothermal, but they don't give you why or hows, which is just a couple of more sentences or a paragraph. So they just use this as an attack upon everything but nuclear. But this idea is not grounded in reality. Of course it is. In recent Intelligent 2 debate, opponents of nuclear power expansion maintained it could not compete with renewables. It could be scaled up to replace fossil fuels. But doing so would necessitate battery technology. Again, they're talking about storing energy. The only thing they can come up with is batteries. And batteries don't exist, so therefore it's no good. That's the argument, and we've covered it hundreds and hundreds of times each year. But there's pumped hydro, circulator water. So it's not like you need a constant new supply of water. You just circulate the water. And if it's mineral, it's heavier. If you saturate it with minerals. So now it's more effective. But there's also compressed air storage. You dig big mine shafts and you compress air down there with excess energy and store it. And then the heat, when you unpack it, when you're compressing it to create heat, the heat you can actually store and keep it for several weeks. So that if you want to unpack the expand, release the air, you have to compress the air, which produces the energy. You can claim the heat that you already got stored. It's a brilliant technology, but there's many others too out there. But I mean, these are absolutely rock-solid technologies. And they refuse to acknowledge it. All they talk about is batteries. Oh, well, they don't exist. So therefore, we need nuclear. So they're scuttling the future of humanity and Earth and all the species by playing this game. Right? By suggesting that no technology exists, only batteries. Or other energy storage capabilities that exist only on very optimistic drawing boards. These all, like pumped hydro, the nuclear industry, Bruce Power last year, there was $4 billion available for renewable. The nuclear industry, Bruce Power in particular, got the $4 billion for the nuclear power plant to build pumped hydro storage. Nuclear power plants don't need storage. They run at full power all the time. And their biggest flaws on top of that. And so they just stole the money from the renewable people, is what they done. The $5 billion from the renewable industry said he couldn't have storage. That's how the nuclear industry works. And after 93 days after Fukushima, the same nuclear industry removed all restrictions on all food from all of Japan. Not just Fukushima, while every other country banned it. And they poisoned everybody in Canada. That's how powerful the nuclear industry is in Canada. But this is absurdness that this is happening or had happened and will continue to happen. It's absurd. This is an absurd that there's no law to prosecute them for that. It's like evil does and absurd doesn't do justice. This is a completely out of control industry that has gone rogue on our planet and our countries and the population. The nuclear industry is a rogue industry that is exterminating all the species. It's so monolithic, it can't exist without endless destruction at this stage. Last August, the U.S. Energy Information Administration issued a report on how battery storage for the electric grid. Again, right, talking about batteries when there's actually storage technology available. Is just a rotten person. That's a rotten person that wrote this. It's just lobbyists, nuclear lobbyists. They're just rotten people. Right, they're sabotaging the renewable industry by putting out hit pieces like this. This is character assassination upon the renewable industry. Last August, and this is desperation. Again, you see this desperation, this slander and vilify and demonize and smear competition. The U.S. Energy Information Administration issued a report on how battery storage for the electric grid has been increasing substantially, but batteries, but not enough for current intermittent energy sources like solar and wind to become baseload power in the near future. Therefore, you got to have nuclear. Again, this is not a real argument. This is a major media, which is regurgitated through many spiderweb bots. Battery storage, but not enough for the current intermittent, which is a slanderous word that they're using it as a slander. Everybody's aware that the flaws, but the storage is the solution, right? Claiming that there's no storage because batteries still don't exist and therefore only nuclear can fill the gap is desperation. And look at the influential people that they're trying to utilize for this Freudian argument. Energy sources to become baseload power in the near future like solar and wind. Does not even touch on the potential toxic waste disposal issues resulting from massive expansion of battery use. The arrogance, the hubris. In short, we can't bet the farm on the application in a desperate search for its technology. Too many lives are at stake. Really? Have you seen what nuclear has done to the planet? You disgusting, sadistic, horrific scum. Your parents must have been mass murderers too, I bet. Intermittent energy sources, solar and wind, to become baseload power in the near future. Not even touching the potential toxic waste of Look what they're doing with nuclear waste for how many generations now? Decades, 7, 8 decades. This was the vitrification plant, I think they call it. Don't quote me. At Hanford. These tanks you see buried in the ground, 1,000,000-gallon tanks. This is like 60 years ago they built the tanks. They were only supposed to last for 2 years. So when you put all this incredible toxic radiation down in the tanks, it gathers up at the bottom, and then the neutron bombardment starts. There's a chain reaction, burns a hole in the tank, and it all runs out. So they got to pretend that it's still there. They spent $17 billion on this thing. Once it was built, they could never go inside of it again. Of course, it didn't work when you turned it on, so they could never go inside of it. I got some of that coming up. So when you talk about the disposal issues, toxic waste disposal issues resulting from massive expansion of battery uses for solar and wind. Let's look at the nuclear legacy of toxic. This study was 2019. So radioactive fallout from nuclear bomb explosions, aka a war they had in the Bikini Atolls. That was a nuclear war, right? Contaminated a huge swath of land and ocean extending over 1 million square kilometers. Does anybody think we're going to have 1 million square kilometers of battery storage? Of battery storage. Yeah, there you go. I got it right. Also, when you look at Hanford, Hanford wants, it's 586 square miles. You can bury all the batteries there. It's a nuclear wasteland. Another 300 years or so before we should get there to cleaning it up. 300 years. 586 square miles, where they made 2 communities give up their graveyards and their homes and everything and leave because of nuclear waste. More than 9,000 victims work at that site each day. If you work at the Hanford site for 8 hours, a single 8 hours, and that just went to the Supreme Court because they appealed it, and that was true, that if you work there for 8 hours at Hanford, nuclear wasteland, 586 square miles, you can get a pension for the rest of your life if you get sick. Even 30, 40 years down the road, you don't have to prove it happened. The fact that you worked at Hanford. So that's the story. Perspective, why nuclear power is good for the public health. Does not even touch on potential waste disposal issues resulting from massive expansion of battery use. So claiming nuclear industry is a clean energy. I just can't sit in silence. I apologize. Bologna urges the Arctic Council to tackle sunken nuclear radiation hazards. I got some 18,000 dump sites in the Arctic from Russia and the Soviet Union. Japan's got 30 million one-ton bags. They're cutting the bags open now that everybody stopped looking. Kind of like 3 Mile Island, boil off millions of gallons of radioactive lethal water and release the atoms into the environment. The nuclear industry is cutting open the bags in a ghost town, abandoned because of radioactive fallout, and growing food there for consumption. Try making that one up on your own. And they got somewhere around 60 million one-ton bags, which is just 3% of a single prefecture. They've been dumping it in the ocean, the grounds, and now when you dump it in the ocean, and Lord knows they're dumping it in the ocean for decades straight, what you got to realize is, and every nuclear power plant got pipes going directly into the ocean too, where they're allowed to release literally whatever they want. So if you dump this down to 1,000, 1,100 fathoms, a fathom is 6 feet. 6 feet. So 6,000 feet. Every 33 feet or so, I'll put this on the screen. This is what they were doing for decades. And it wasn't just in the one spot. They were just driving around the ocean, dumping it off the ships. So 6,600 feet. Every 33 feet is an atmosphere. That's 200 atmospheres. Each atmosphere is around 14.5 pounds. So that's 2,900 pounds. 2,900 pounds on barrels. So when you're dumping this stuff at 2,900 pounds, if you apply 2,900 pounds to that barrel, what do you think happens? The barrel ruptures, right? So everything they've been dumping in the ocean was rupturing. And man, United Kingdom dumped it for decades. And so did Russia and the Soviet Union and America and many other countries, including Canada. So when they talk about thermal and tidal energy, both 24 hours a day energy, and supplemented it with wind and solar and backed that up with pumped hydro and compressed air storage technology, that's a win. There's no way you can fail. 0 ways to lose there. These types of people, though, fear versus risk. Despite improvements since the 90s, air pollution from burning fossil fuels is estimated to kill more than 60,000 Americans every year. Nuclear kills infinitely more than that after an accident. This is a disaster for every species on top of that. The claimed 60,000 lives are killed by pollution. Well, that's because you build the facilities in the communities. You don't need to do it. Nikola Tesla created the transformer so you didn't have to do that 100 years ago. Shit for brains. By causing cardiovascular respiratory diseases, which is exactly what radiation does, just a single exposure. In order for this coal, oil, and gas emissions to cause those illnesses, you have to live there for 25 or 30 years. You get sick, just move out of there, you'll get better. With radiation, it stays sequestered in your muscles, your organs, and your bones for the rest of your life. It's also associated with adverse pregnancy outcomes, just like radiation, by the way, for all species. And is implicated in contributing to the development of mortality of lung cancer, breast cancer. There's 6 times more breast cancer within 15 miles of a nuclear power plant. And thyroid cancer! Really? Really? You sack of shit. You disgusting sack of shit to use that. You horrific, despicable scum to use that. You revolting parasite to use that. You sadistic, twisted, hideous, gross monster, you. And so the study was PubMed. This is where they publish all kinds of there's a word for it, right? False studies, basically. Ambient particulate matter air pollution is associated with increased risk of thyroid cancers. Gee, that's funny. So does nuclear fallout from Japan that covered the entire planet in just 19 days. This part of the model here is 19 days later, the whole planet is covered in it. So gas, oil, and coal emissions don't have that attribute. Here's another model. Is that enough for you? Here's another country that made the models. Oh, and we got the studies of the fallout on top of that. Just, how can we have a future when everybody... So I typed in Fukushima. Look at that, Fukushima and thyroid. Never even got to the word thyroid. It showed up on its own. In PubMed. We've covered PubMed a lot of times. Minimizing the health effects of nuclear accident in Fukushima on thyroids. Gee, that's funny. They were just blamed that on air pollution. They just didn't acknowledge nuclear had those attributes. Experiences the crisis communication during radiation emergency. Not coal plant emergency, not oil plant emergency, not gas plant emergency, but a nuclear emergency. And the recovery of communities. You don't go back to a nuclear wasteland, you disgusting parasites. Development of an application tool to support returnees in Fukushima. Look at all the people on this study. Again, these are goblins. These are, like Kevin called earlier, PhD monsters. Literally and figuratively monsters. Individual external doses below the reference levels 1 microsievert per year. 5 years after 2011 Fukushima nuclear accident among all children in Soma City, Fukushima retrospective observational study. This is absurdness to suggest. First off, they're too far away to be counting this in microsieverts. You would count it in atomic decays per minute. Physical atoms that they can ingest or consume or breathe in. Claiming all the children. Wow, how heartless is that, really? Really, like how heartless is it to claim that the children never got any doses in a nuclear wasteland? Look at all the people in the study. They're not people. They're not humans like me or you. They don't care about life or anything like that. The median participant age was 8 years. These are actual monsters, aren't they? So they're talking less than a millisievert a year in an actual nuclear wasteland, where everything around them, I'll show you. Proportions of residences with an annual additional dose from external exposures dropped from 15.6% to 0. So claiming that only 15.6% was the highest it went in a nuclear wasteland. Decontamination only limited temporal effects of reducing individual doses. But you're talking about 1 millisievert. Soma is right... let me get out of the way. You can see the scale behind me. That's a 10-mile scale. So less than 50 miles away from a nuclear meltdown. Minamisoma was 3.43 million becquerels a kilogram. You got to multiply that by 64 to get a square meter. 90 millisieverts. 90,000 microsieverts for thyroid exposures in the citizens. But the media is claiming that the children only got less than 1 microsievert, when it was actually 90,000 microsieverts. They have so many straw man arguments here. Recent study from Johns Hopkins, which was good intentions now weaponized against the population because the industry took it over. Germany looms as a lesson how fear of nuclear power is more deadly than nuclear power itself. France, whose electrical grid is 70% nuclear, no, it's not. France has just started up coal plants. Half their reactors are offline, for God's sakes, because they built them all at the same time. Then they gave it up. Recent calculations suggest a death toll of 1,100 people a year from pollution, because Germany closed down its nuclear power plant. Of course, these calculations are by the nuclear cranks themselves. It's better than the whole population getting sick from radiation ultimately. In the end, 3 Mile Island posed no threat to the plant workers. Right? They can't, that's the only way they can survive is lying. This is 3 Mile Island and the Susquehanna River. So everybody downriver is being poisoned all the time. Look at the farms. Look at all the farms everywhere. Calling nuclear evil doesn't really do it justice. The accident and the movie together had launched the anti-nuclear movement on such a trajectory that some 67 planned American nuclear power plants would be cancelled by 1988, within 2 years. They're all going to be built in farmland so they can poison you at the supermarket. Such an evil thing to do, build a nuclear power plant in farmland. New designs in the last 40 years make the feared meltdowns virtually impossible. The majority of the Americans' reactors are the same as Fukushima reactors. So whoever wrote this obviously wasn't just your average scumbag. This was a supercell scumbag. Radioactivity lasting for billions of years actually doesn't make it any more dangerous than chemical waste from solar and wind production. It does sound a lot like Rod Adams, don't it? Because Rod was one of the creepiest pro-nuclear we've ever come across, who now is a venture capitalist, who made a living working at a nuclear power plant as just a regular employee, is now a venture capitalist, but spent his entire time doing podcasts, spreading propaganda about nuclear, who disposal is much more voluminous than all the nuclear waste combined. So claiming solar and wind is worse than all the nuclear waste combined. Like, okay, so let's compare that. So if you take a pound of nuclear waste and a pound and 1 million pounds of solar and wind chemicals. If you take the pound of solar, if you take 1 million pounds of the solar waste and you put it right by a subway and everybody walks past it, we'll go, what the frig is that big stupid mess? And go on about and enjoy the rest of their lives. Everybody walks past a single pound of nuclear waste for the next billion years will die that day or that week. Everybody. So if you put it at a subway, everybody who walks past it dies. All day, every day, forever. You can exterminate every human and every species on the planet. Take that 1 pound of nuclear waste to another planet with 8 million species on it and exterminate all of them. And whose chemical toxicity lasts forever. Once the gravity of climate change really begins to sink in, starting in the 90s, which was just after the peak of nuclear testing, and still ongoing nuclear dumping, Americans could have embraced nuclear power for its unmatched ability to generate massive amounts. When I heard the word clean energy and nuclear, I gotta get myself one of those dummy boxing bags that are like a dummy, so you can just punch them. Put nuclear on it, and I can punch it every time I walk past it. Irrational fear is all that stands in the way. So this was a super scumbag, eh? Of course, radiophobia. I was wondering when that was going to show up. Persisted may keep us debating nuclear power for years. That definitely sounds like Rod Adams, man. The list of nations warming up to nuclear, whether to meet emission goals or for energy independence. It's worth mentioning Japan, where a majority now support restarting nuclear reactors. Again, this is absolutely unequivocally nonsense. So it's time for the United States to get on board and lead the way. Instead of the no nuke protest calls of the 70s, it's time to make the rallying cry, "No nukes." So whoever wrote this, I hope their sister beats the fucking shit out of them in the near future. Because you know their sister, whoever that person is, him or her, their sister will beat the shit out of them next time they see him. Why Nuclear Power is Good for Public Health by David Warmflash. There's not many people on the planet like to stick a cattle prod up in their fucking rectum and let it go for a couple of hours. He might be one of them. I apologize to anybody who might find that offensive. You just don't understand nuclear. RNA viruses, this is other stories this despicable subhuman creep wrote. RNA viruses, biological dark matter. He only wrote 3 stories. The murky past and predictions and the fusion. This person's not a nuclear scientist, nuclear academic. He didn't write the article, he just put his name on it. It was written by a nuclear lobbyist. Universal Blood. He wrote 4 stories, I think it was. Oh God, Counterpunch. Where will the nuclear waste go? This was KARL GROSSMAN. KARL's like, he's not sure. He wants to be an anti-nuclear, but he doesn't understand the basic fundamental of it for some reason. What is it to be done about the nuclear waste at other nuclear plants? Decades ago, one scheme was to put it on rockets to send it to the sun. Because they understood decades ago this thing was still splitting the atom into the environment. And then to quote Forbes, really? KARL, you're going to quote Forbes and expect people to take you serious? Forbes, James Conkra, Michael Schellenberg, and the rest of the anti-nuclear character assassins. Forbes. Disgusting Forbes. Because of the possibility of launch failures, if the payload of radioactive hazards explodes on launch, then everybody gets radioactive. But quoting Forbes is you lose all credibility immediately. Then there had been the plan to construct a repository for nuclear waste at Yucca Mountain. Well, there was $20 billion in litigation alone. The problem with Yucca Mountain, besides the fact it's on an earthquake fault line, was, and they knew it, by the way, was how much heat can the mountain hold? That's what the criteria was. How much heat can the mountain hold for 200 years? Because everybody that knows what about who done this will be gone, and then the blame is left for nobody even knows what happened. So Yucca Mountain was just a stupid idea. It's the same idea as digging a hole. And like, dig the hole and put it down. If that's the only solution you retards can come up with, then let's get it over with and do it. The problem is that's going to detonate at some point. In 5 years, 50 years, 10 years, who knows? It's going to melt down. For sure, right? That's the problem with nuclear waste. But if you leave it on the surface, it's splitting the atom into the environment. There's no way we can have a future for any species. We got to go back to the days of the pitchforks and torches and just burn these fuckers at it, and get people in there that actually can have a conversation. Because all we get is propaganda, and more propaganda, and disgusting propaganda, and sickening propaganda, and revolting propaganda, and propaganda, and it all starts again. It was designated nation's permanent nuclear repository in '87 by idiots because they knew it couldn't be used, and $15 billion was spent preparing it. I'm going to put it in the mountain out in the nuclear wasteland where they've done all the nuclear testing. Happens to be on an earthquake fault line on top of that. The very big problem concerning Yucca Mountain is a nuclear waste dump. It's in an active earthquake zone with 33 faults on site. 33. Of course, they couldn't find one of them until recently for some magical reason. Now, Finland has built a nuclear site for its 4 nuclear power plants on an island, just digging a big hole in the ground and take it down and dump it. Nothing can go wrong, just like WIP. WIP didn't melt down, it had a truck fire, and it cost $6 billion to fix the truck fire. But thank goodness they never had a nuclear event. It took them 3 years to fix the truck fire. They had to dig all new tunnels after it. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Well, just look at that. The WIP was supposed to be just a pilot project, not a permanent repository. But the industry is so disgusting. It only exists, the nuclear industry exists in this very weird, strange realm where it has to sneak around and do something. It can't be genuine about any facet of the conversation. It just can't do it. It refuses to do it. Right? And so it has this 70 plus years of just lying. That's what it does. It lies. And so each generation has to know what the lies are and regurgitate them. The same lies, decades after decades. The very big problem, nuclear waste needs to be isolated from life for way more than 100,000 years. So Kevin Camp claims that the Fukushima nuclear reactors didn't melt down. Or the fuel pools. So Kevin, who works for Helen Caldicott's group, let's play a little clip we got of him. Now, and I'll explain what I'm talking about because that's only fair, right? You shouldn't smear somebody unless you can back it up, right? So he's going to do a comparison to Fukushima. He's going to claim, it'd be worse than Fukushima if the fuel pools at San Onofre melted down. But Fukushima lost the fuel pools, and Fukushima were, at the time, some of the biggest reactors in the world. These are 720-ton reactors with decades of reactor cores in those 2 pools at the top of the buildings. They're 100% gone. By the way, so is Reactor 3 and the fuel pools. But let's listen to Kevin's version of what happened. That KARL GROSSMAN is
high-level radioactive waste storage pools. And incredibly, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the nuclear industry, has given...
I think he's talking about San Onofre. Let's keep going here.
Short shrift to the safety risks of pools. So these are catastrophes waiting to happen. There's the slower motion boil down scenario on the pools, but there's the fast motion drain down scenario. And one instance of that we can point to in the United States several times now over the decades is the near drop of heavy loads. And one of my favorites, because I'm from there, Southwest Michigan, is Palisades Atomic Reactor. October 2005, nearly dropped a load weighing 107 tons. It dangled over the pool for...
So 107 tons?
2 days. They nearly overrode the emergency brake on the crane, which would have been catastrophic. You could drain these pools pretty much instantly. The waste would be on fire in a matter of hours, and the radioactivity releases would dwarf what we've seen at Fukushima Daiichi.
So it would dwarf 107 tons would dwarf 5 million pounds at the top of each building in 2 fuel pools. So that's 4 fuel pools, but there was actually 8 fuel pools that we know for a fact were lost, not counting the reactors, which are 700 tons each. And Kevin's saying that losing 107 tons at Palestine nuclear power plant would have been worse than, would have dwarfed Fukushima. So that's disgusting. That's despicable. And that's 2 strikes for KARL. Grossman. That's actually a lowball figure, says Camp, the scumbag, with Helen Callicott's genocide group Beyond Nuclear. And I like, people might like Helen Callicott. Let me defend my statement here. Because you shouldn't smear people unless you can back it up. I don't, see, is the whole thing. But sometimes I'll play the clip. Here's how crazy Helen Callicott coming. Take it away, crazy lady. It's Reactor 4. There's some best shit stuff here, man.
Building 4 is also similarly fragile, and it's got a huge cooling pool on top with all its fuel rods, but they have been removing them. And it's been a very delicate procedure, and they've removed almost all. So if that collapsed now, I think it would probably be okay.
This is madness, right? To suggest that Reactor 4 is intact. She was asked about that because she's done that kind of interview hundreds of times.
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Do you think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in, saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
It doesn't work that way, folks. It's just absurd. Very tidy people. Very tidy people. Ladies, James Lucid called her before you even get the clip up. That tells you how famous she is. Iodine-129 remains radioactive for 314 million years. Well, because he says it's got 20 half-lives. Because, like, generally we give them 10 half-lives. Now we got to start looking at 20 half-lives. What the hell, KARL? You're not helping. What should be done with nuclear waste? First Camps, who denies Fukushima happened, says we got to stop making it. Calls for closure of all 92 nuclear power plants in the United States and the building of no more. Because they know the truth, but they just can't admit it. They can't admit it what I've done to you tonight. He can't do that. Most nuclear waste, he says, at reactor sites are pools of water that must be kept circulating. Well, the pools of water, each pool boils off 120,000 liters minimum a day, and each liter is trillions of isotopes that would normally power millions of homes, is now up the skinny stacks and into the farmland and the communities. It's the most frightening statement imaginable is what I just told you right there. Which must be kept circulating. No, which got to keep filling up with water because it's boiling off 120,000. If there's a loss of water accident, the waste in the pool can go up in flames. Like Fukushima did. That you refuse to acknowledge it. Camps? It's shocking, boy. I'm not the bad person for being upset at the lawyer, am I? Beyond Nuclear with other environmental safe energy groups. Beyond Nuclear. Which is Helen crazy, batshit, lunatic, traitorous Helen Caldicott. Government plan invoking a so-called interim nuclear waste site in Texas, New Mexico, would be amid largely Latino communities on top of the biggest aquifers in the U.S., encompassing 8 states and the main source of drinking water and irrigation. But we see this at all the laboratories too, right? Los Alamos National Laboratory, Sandinas Laboratory. All the major laboratories have those exact same attributes, where they're on top of the country's biggest aquifers. This is where they want to build it in Canada too, is in the same place. On top of Canada's biggest aquifers. But we're seeing this through all of the nuclear industry. In every country, they do the exact same thing. They do the exact same thing. My apologies for any delays because I'm still catching up. Changing the proportion of anemia among young women after the Great Eastern Japan earthquake, the Fukushima Health Management Survey. They're the last people on the planet I'll be trusting, trust me. So changes. Look at all the people that paid their mortgages and everything else and got their kids piano lessons and violin lessons and went off flying around on vacations. Just got to sell out all the humans in your study. This study was just published 2 days ago. The study aimed to evaluate changes in the proportion of anemia, white blood cell counts, high counts among young women, which you expect, right? After the earthquake in 2011. The Fukushima Health Management they set criteria for external doses, not internal doses for radiation. Also, that won't get mentioned here, so thought I'd throw that out there before I forgot about it. Focuses on the women aged between 20 to 44 who lived in evacuation areas in the nuclear wastelands. Who lives in the nuclear wastelands. And body mass, no history of smoking or alcohol, because they'll use that to discredit any illnesses. Oh, you were probably a smoker, huh? Bet you were. Well, too bad, you just blew it. Our findings signal the importance of preventing anemia in young women after the disaster. Again, they're only talking about earthquakes. Anemia is a medical condition commonly seen in clinical practice with a number of red blood cells, and consequently their oxygen carrying capacity is insufficient to meet the human's needs. We're seeing that in all the airplane rage now because everybody is saturated with isotopes. In Japan, studied prevalence of anemia among women was 17.1%, they claimed. Insufficient red cell production, they said, due to inadequate dietary intake of iron. And yeah, so iron's really important. But nuclear radiates everything in your body. Your body attacks the radiation inside your body, or animals or insects or birds or whatever. with white blood cells, and it'll do it for the rest of your life. So a high white blood cell count after a nuclear accident is just emblematic of radiation sickness and poisoning that is a lifelong factor. You will have less oxygen for the rest of your life. So I don't know why I got that there. Oh yeah, so women decreased consistently since 1945 in Japan, which was right after Nagasaki and Hiroshima in 1945. It's just an accident. Women exposed to Chernobyl, ain't that an interesting connotation? In 1986 were more likely to develop anemia after delivery. No, they were worse anemia. Their body, the reason Chernobyl is invoked here is because of radioactive fallout. Now, radioactive fallout doesn't care if you're pregnant, okay? It doesn't care if you're waiting to have a baby either. It's not going to get worse just because you had a baby. Nuclear accident at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant resulted in widespread releases of radioactive materials. Again, they're invoking radiation, are they not? Chernobyl, Fukushima, I can't tell the difference. Can you tell the difference? The residents nearby the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, which barely exists because it melted down and blew up and caught fire and all these other stuff, were particularly at risk of radiation exposure may cause the acute and late phase of radiation sickness. And that's one of the emblematic signs of sickness is a high white blood cell count. Concerns over potential contamination. Potential of agricultural products produced in Fukushima Prefecture among pregnant women in Minamisoma. Again, right, 10 million becquerels a kilogram. You're going to have to multiply that by 64 to get a square meter where they're going to stand up. You can't avoid it if you're there, and they were there. Led to the reduction in consumptions of rice, vegetables, fruits, following a disaster, which you were supposed to evacuate that place, right? There was no reports of anemia and evacuees from the Great Eastern Japan earthquake, even though it's a common disease, which is true, but it's you expect to see that as a manifestation of radiation poisoning. So why are we invoking Chernobyl and Fukushima into this conversation if that's not part of the equation? And then the towns are all towns that were mostly evacuated or partially evacuated, which is madness, because you evacuate part of a town due to high radiation, you shouldn't be in the other side of town either. We covered all this. And then following the World Health Organization, which is a fictitious organization by a military-industrial complex group known as United Nations, as George Bush, I showed you earlier, called the New World Order, and they've destroyed everybody's sovereignty and freedoms. A study was performed in accordance with Helsinki Declaration and ethical guides. So they're trying to give it street creds by invoking the United Nations lapdogs or the Helsinki Declaration and ethical guidelines for medical. Obviously, they didn't have ethical guidelines in this one. And then using labor and welfare and their legacy of leaving people to suffer. And I'll quantify that as those assertions. I'm not trying to pick on anybody, acknowledge evil when there's evil, okay? That's I can quantify it. Just give me a minute. Because United Nations took down the page I'm going to show you here in a little tiny bit a few weeks ago. That's been up since 2012. There it is. Score. Let's roll, baby. Here we go. The problem when you talk about nuclear is you can't rush. It's like Well, not like chess, because you can rush chess, right? I used to play speed chess when I was young, like 3-minute games, 4-minute games. It was quite good when I was young. I don't know if I was a master or nothing, but there wasn't many people beating me. Average disposition density of cesium on soil. So the second row over there is the population. This row here is the atomic decays of gamma. This was United Nations absorbed doses of red bone marrow for adults and children in Fukushima Prefecture, excluding the evacuation zone. But all of these communities should have been evacuated. So, like Fukushima City was 229,000 atomic decays per square meter, like the size of your dinner table where you're standing up to, or children are waiting to go to school to. And they're only acknowledging gamma, they're ignoring alpha, neutrons, and betas. They're ignoring plutonium and uranium and curium, which is the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods. So when you look at all these communities, think about this row here, becquerels per square meter. So these people were, and in this row here, these people are all left abandoned into the nuclear wasteland. Despite the fact that the United Nations said there was no adverse health effect, there was nothing but adverse health effect. You couldn't avoid it. Right? Because these are radioactive wastelands. They're not supposed to be any numbers there, like 15 or 20 maybe from weapons fallout, but not into the tens of thousands, my God, boy. So they didn't evacuate them, but this is going to be true worldwide. And that study over there showed people on the West Coast sequestering it into their testicles. You can't do that. Animals would have done it too, without the animals and insects and all the other species ingesting it and sequestering it. So again, this is a model from France covering the planet in just 16 days. That's a study showing the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs being aggregated in the testicles each day, 360 plus atoms. Participant characteristics in 2011, July 2011, and March 2012. So that was the study from July 11 to March 2000. The anniversary, the first anniversary, was originally it was 9,000 women, 25,000 women. But by 2018, it was only 1,200, which was 13% of the original. So it's not a real study, now is it? On top of that, see? Showed smaller mean for women. Fukushima, after the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant accident. So, August 12, 2014, TEPCO to abandon the REVA system. So the REVA system was set up in 2011, in June. Okay, it absolutely wasn't. If you go on my playlist, you'll see presentations on 1,900 pictures from that era. And they weren't doing this at that stage at all. It's absurd to even suggest they were. The system processed 76,000 tons of contaminated water and was repeatedly forced to shut down by a variety of problems. One of the problems will be dismantling and disposing of that system has become contaminated itself after processing radioactive material. Underneath the plant, an enormous amount of groundwater continues to flow directly into the ocean. Utility at that point, 2014, has a limited amount of water it can store in storage tanks. The tanks were just for the wells they dug around the site. But now they claim that, because they had 1,000 tanks in 2013, they got 1,000 tanks in 2022. So how many tanks did they build in 9 years? Oh, that's right, none. So They released a video of underground water entering the crippled Diachi. I'm trying to build you a picture because this is so important. 2.2 sieverts per hour. .2 sieverts an hour per liter is what it was. The ELP system is being operated on a trial status in 2014. TEPCO has not determined when the trial stage will end. The highly radioactive water has not only damaged equipment causing corrosion and leaks, but prevented workers from being able to work near the system. They show you people in pictures in paper suits in a nuclear wasteland. In paper suits. How's the paper suit going to protect you from gamma shines and X-rays and neutron bursts? Huh? Okay, so TEPCO officials cannot estimate how frequent water will be discharged from the nuclear wasteland. So, for the next month, the radiation levels of stored water will be tested. Cesium-134, groundwater containing less than 1 becquerel per liter of cesium-134 and 137, 5 becquerels per liter of beta, and 1,500 becquerels of tritium. Then it will be released. Okay. So if you go look at the numbers, water samples taken from a cable trench contain levels of radiation comparable to those seen in the first weeks of the disaster. That was 2013. At 8.7 million becquerels of tritium, 2.35 billion becquerels of cesium, and 750 million becquerels of other radioactive materials. But the biggest byproduct is going to be curium. That's missing from the equation for some reason. 5,000 tons are captured in one trench, leaking out of this one cable trench, permeating the soil, which means the soil is thousands of sieverts, and leaking into the ocean. So you can't mitigate it. 5,000 times 1,000 is 5 million. And what was the point of that, Dana? Yeah, 5,000 tons. So there's 1,000 liters in a ton, right? So 5 million liters. 5 million liters, and each liter is saturated with radiation. So that's 11 million sieverts you're talking about. And 5,000 liters would be 11 million sieverts. Because you can't filter this. The filter is so radioactive after 20 minutes you can't get back in the building. 2013, September the 5th, water grown out at 2.2 sieverts per hour. That's per liter. So in Koriyama City, elementary school in Japan, they didn't evacuate it. 34 miles west of the Fukushima Daiichi, the Koriyama City, the school, elementary school students, they wouldn't evacuate them, so the teachers used water bottles to shield the radiation coming from the courtyards and other areas around the school buildings. The bottles are filled with water and placed inside of square boxes. So they fill the bottles up with water, put it in the boxes, and also store it to stop the radiation from radiating the children in the school, rather than evacuate them. That's how batshit crazy the nuclear industry actually is. It's using water bottles to shield radiation coming from the courtyard and other areas around the school buildings. The bottles are filled with water placed inside the boxes. According to the school, it reduced the radiation levels to 1/3. That's still just nothing. Residents of the Koriyama City, which is millions of one-ton bags, were picked up around the city. So if you look up the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, they took this down about 3 weeks ago, this page, because I was using it. So they had done a study at Koriyama City. If you look at this row right here, Koriyama City has 340,000 people plus, and 162,000 decays of cesium-137 per minute per square meter. then you have to extrapolate all the other isotopes. It can't just be one, see? So that's the same place where those children are to, that they refuse to evacuate. Because Kawamata City is outside the evacuation zone, the government has barely conducted any decontamination activities in the nuclear wasteland. And the teachers have to put bottles of water there to shield the students. Because the nuclear industry is just, it's crazy, man. It's crazy. Tokyo Electric determines human error caused the contaminated leak. Human error. 100 tons of water containing 240 million becquerels per liter of beta ray. 240 million atoms, thereabouts, per liter, and 100 tons. Do anybody really think it's just 100 tons? Is anybody really that naive? But it does show it because you're spraying water over melted reactor cores. It was partially treated. Still 240 million becquerels per liter. Look, after 1 day of filtering, unplug the radioactive water and plug in fresh water. And for 1,000 years, the fresh water coming out of the filters be lethal doses by the gallon. You can't filter this stuff. So the workers, which is the homeless, the destitute, the victims of society, immigrants who don't speak the language, are not sufficiently monitoring the water inside the tanks. The tanks, if you fill the tanks up with this stuff, you're talking about 1.4 million sieverts per tank. You physically can't build another tank anywhere on the site if you do that. So the tanks were empty. If this was radioactive water being poured over the curium that we're looking at there, you couldn't get back on the site, let alone close enough to take a picture. You couldn't have took the picture. You would have dropped dead. TEPCO submits criteria to Nuclear Regulatory, the Non-Regulation Authority. 10 becquerels of beta ray nuclides will be discharged into the ocean once it's diluted. That was the leak contaminated water number 3 of international safety impacts. 24 million becquerels per liter of beta ray emitters include strontium, 700 million becquerels of gamma like cesium, and 1.7 million becquerels per liter of cesium-137. But the biggest byproduct would have been the curium byproducts. Curium isotopes need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. Regulators urged TEPCO to dump tritiated water into the Pacific 2013, as if the water in 2013 was only tritium. I already showed you the Riva system, the ALP system, and Siri systems simply didn't work. And they still don't exist. It's a total fiction. And they're talking about tritium in 2013 and multiple nuclear meltdowns. That had China syndromes on top of that. So that the steam coming out of the ground is lethal doses. There's so many lies that if we wouldn't dump it in our lands, why should we dump it in our oceans? If the cargo ships at sea are found to be deliberately dumping just normal waste overboard, they're banned from doing business in many international markets. It seems that the continuous batch releases of contaminated water, this is lethal water. They can't keep it on site, see? Because the homeless are dying and everybody gets scared. There were 16,000 people ran away from this site. Of course, it's not true unless it shows it to you, apparently. Yeah, because it could have been dealt with more responsibly, but no, you can't contain it. It's lethal by the gallon. If you had a gallon here when I started the show, it would have been dead about 20 minutes later. So let's go back to 2013. And I'm going to show you a perfectly symmetrical building. And they're going to call it Reactor 4. That's 2013. But yet they redacted parts of the cast. Look at that. Why would you redact that? You think terrorists is going to get it? September 1,500 assemblies. Reporters Without Borders blast. Of course, that's not true. That's not really the Reactor 4 I showed you earlier. I'll just show you what Reactor 4 actually looks like. Hang on. Of course, I can find everything but Reactor 4 at this moment. Here's Arnie Gunnarsson. He made the racks for the assemblies in those fuel pools. I put him up where the fuel pools are too. He doesn't even know the fuel pools are gone. Or he's a lawyer.
The division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
So how come he doesn't know they're gone? So the journalists, although some photographers and camera operators will be present, neither of the freelance videographers will be allowed to use a camera or video equipment. Because that's the official picture. Oh, and that's the official picture. So why is all the media pretending, like, it must be pretty bad when the media worldwide is pretending they're in a building that don't exist. Do we have a precedence for that? I don't think we do we? So claimed in 2013 they're removing fuel from a building that don't even exist. How come that's not a crime? Well, it's not a crime. It's not illegal to poison you with radiation, right? Congress doesn't have the authority to make it illegal. Just the Nuclear Regulatory Agency has the authority, and they ain't going to be doing it. Project been labeled some of one of the most dangerous nuclear operations in human history. And then they show you a beautiful symmetrical fuel pool in a building that doesn't even exist. It is the most dangerous in human history. The assemblies are made up of 80 fuel rods. They're 12 feet long, 18 pounds each. And there's typically 1,800 pounds in an assembly. But the problem is there's 800 assemblies in a reactor core. The fuel pools were stuffed. So when you talk about 1,500, that's just a fraction of what was actually there. It's probably around 600,000 fuel rods there. Then they talk about 750 trillion becquerels of radioactivity in an assembly. Now, 7,500 trillion is not no tiny number. The problem is, when these melt down, they consume steel and rock and rebar and water and elements. They atomize it, aerosol it, ionize it, and radiate it. And so it's not 7.5 trillion atoms. It's 7.5 trillion atoms per assembly ends up being produced each year because the chain reaction. Now, there's around 1% plutonium per weight. So just working on their numbers only, if each assembly, in that case, is going to be 14 pounds of plutonium, for goodness sakes. So claiming there's 1,500 assemblies, we'll just go with the 1,300, is 18,000, almost 19,000 pounds of plutonium in the buildings that don't exist anymore. So that was released into the environment. But they're not acknowledging what was missing from the fuel pools, the decades of reactor cores and the reactor. It's absurd. The whole story is absurd. The World Nuclear Industry Status Report claimed a full release from the Unit 4 spent fuel pool without any containment or control could cause by far the most serious radiological releases disaster to date. But it had already happened and they pretended that it didn't. That's not a solution, by the way, pretending it didn't happen. Apparently you can't see the guts hanging out of it. That doesn't mean nothing to people for some reason. That don't register in people's... I don't know if it does or not. I shouldn't really say that, should I? It's significant. It's a catastrophic event to the entire ecosystem. The assemblies could be moved too close together. The spent fuel rods could break or be exposed to air and potentially ignite. And scenarios would potentially release a massive amount of radiation would necessitate the evacuation of workers from the nuclear waste site. Well, it happened over and over in different reactors on top of that. According to Bloomberg, if that was to happen, that happened. It's the strangest conversation imaginable. A self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction similar to the meltdown and the crippled reactors could be prompted. Really? You really think that didn't happen? You really think that they're actually in a building that don't exist? Of course you don't. If you're watching this, typical, like the people that follow me, I'm obviously not talking to them. I'm talking to the policymakers. I'm talking to the industry itself, that you got to stop lying, murdering, and all the species and humanity. We ran out of time. TEPCO failed to deliver the promise to install a fence, because it's going to cost $1 billion, they said. The pits, these pits, temporary storage pits. They're showing you pictures of people walking on top of these pits. If that was the highly radioactive water, you would not be walking on top of it. 6,000 becquerels per cubic centimeter. You know it's bad when they're talking in cubic centimeters. So there's 1,000 cubic centimeters in a liter. So you got to multiply 6,000 by, you got 6 million per liter. So why not just say that? Why use cubic? Because that's just a fraction of the isotopes that are going to be. You can't just have cesium in the water. You're going to have similar, 100 times more strontium-90 for every cesium. Particularly after 1,000 days, which is long after the 1,000 days. That'll go on for tens of thousands of years. So if you're going to use pumps to transfer this highly contaminated water, you can't step over the hose without getting a lethal dose, even after the operation is over. You can never pick up the hose and move it again. Like, you get what's going on here? This was about making you believe that the industry wasn't going to kill the planet and the ocean. That's 100%. So it was all about lies and deception and misrepresentation and deceit and dishonesty. Look over here, don't look over at Dana. More contaminated water leaks at Fukushima. 290,000 becquerels radiation per cubic centimeter, which works out to 290 million atoms per liter. Now, if this is curium isotopes, you're talking about many sieverts per liter. And this is probably what we're most likely going to be talking about because they're not identifying it. TEPCO plans to dump the water stored at Fukushima into the Pacific. It's already released enormous amounts of highly contaminated water directly into the ocean from a plethora of leaks from the reactor buildings. Leaks! 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 Jeez, I can't see any leaks. Anytime you're ready, Dana. I can't see any leaks. Can you see anywhere where they can leak out? Well, you can see why I'm like I am. Because when I see these connotations where they play down every facet of it, after the water's passed through the crippled units, crippled? Are we looking at the same buildings as these people? Does that look crippled to anybody? Right, and so that was the biggest pump truck, cement pump truck. You can't pump water with a cement truck. Other systems designed to remove other radioactive material have been overwhelmed by the complexity and the concentrations of contamination found at the Fukushima Daiichi. So you had the Riva system, the ELP system, and the Siri system. None of them could be functional because the system becomes so radioactive you can no longer be on the same site, let alone the same area. Japan works to speed up decommissioning of Fukushima Daiichi. The workers are paid around $11 American per day. $11 per day. Mom, nuclear scientists are only being paid $11 per day to work at the nuclear meltdown. No, that's not them, son. That's the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society. Nuclear scientists would never go to Fukushima. Fukushima City, 90,000 houses are eligible for decontamination. Dana, how many houses are in Fukushima City? Sure, that's a great question. Why didn't you ask me that earlier? 120,000 houses in Fukushima City. 90,000 of them are eligible for decontamination. Let that sink in. There's nowhere safe in the city. If 90,000 of the houses are so radioactive, that means the whole bloody city is incredibly radioactive. Every millimeter, every square cubic centimeter. And Fukushima City is population 230,000 people, and the majority of the houses, almost all the houses are eligible for decontamination. That's revolting. That's terrifying. I'm doing my best to get through everything because otherwise it doesn't get done. The ice wall won't stop the groundwater from entering the building. Because why didn't they build a real wall? What kind of weirdo said, I know, let's build an ice wall? The bypass operation not having an effect on Fukushima? The Unit 3 debris removal operation releases 280 billion becquerels per hour, the mixed oxide fuel site. First off, the building doesn't even exist, just a piece of rubble, a stump. And 230 billion is like a gram or something an hour. It's absurd to suggest that's all that's been coming out of there. It's absurd. The debris cleanup operation, Unit 3, released more radiation environment than will be released from the plant in the next 12 years at an estimated 10,000 becquerels per hour. 10,000 becquerels per hour when it comes to nuclear is nothing. It's not even a gram. Ambassador Kennedy toured the plant on the 2014th of May, pretending she's in a building that doesn't exist, right, to use her for propaganda, at the Radioactive Reactor 4 spent fuel pool. That's the building there. There is no fuel pool. It doesn't exist anymore. Right? And so propaganda has destroyed everybody and all the species' futures. When do we stop and say, hey, wait a second. TEPCO can't bring the contaminated water issues under control. There's certain parts of the site they don't even have control over. Tanks were built hastily to hold the highly contaminated water, which led to a variety of, oh crap. The Advanced Liquid Processing System has yet to work reliably or function reliably. 2014 April. We're almost through it. April 21st, 2014. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe pledged $487,000 US to handle the issues with the contaminated workers. Again, this is absurd, tiny amount. Because it's homeless and the destitute and the victims of society. Okay, so radiation is too high for TEPCO's personnel to stay in the control rooms. March the 15th. It was all over at that stage, folks. Residents forced to dump nuclear waste in parks and forests. Radioactive forests or a permanent risk must be cut down. Every gust of wind showers not just cesium, but thousands of fission product particles into the community. They closed down 130 schools in South Korea, because of radioactive fallout. Tokyo was incredibly contaminated, and its water resources were permanently, and all of its infrastructure was permanently contaminated. The water filtration reclamation facilities, they can't get rid of the sediment because of the radiation. Helicopters couldn't go near the plant. They were using radioactive water from reactor 5 and 6. So how did you get radioactive water in 5 and 6? That we never hear anybody talking about. 100 tons a day. And why is there more? Why are you able to do that every day? What's creating the radioactive water at reactor 5 and 6? That's a super important story right there. It's an incredibly important story. Fukushima reactor site engulfed by steam or something like steam. This was work to remove the rubble was suspended. This is lethal doses in 6 places where the earth cracked. The fixed Geiger counters were showing 10 sieverts an hour in the plumes all over the site, so they had to leave the site. You have pieces of cement, concrete all around the site at a sievert plus an hour. The Prime Minister ordered a halt to cooling after his voice seawater could cause a chain reaction of recriticality, which they acknowledged, by the way, in that show or that presentation last night on Harvard University. Reactor 1 started melting 50 minutes before the tsunami showed up. Washington Post, surprise, 2 more reactors melted down. TEPCO conveniently left a part out of the story. Now people are used to the situation. So if you do nothing, even Tokyo can become off limited. 36 million people. We may not be able to live in Japan someday, which is an accurate statement, by the way. You're not supposed to be there right now. The IAEA, this is the craziest, most mad headline imaginable. The IAEA admitted there's no such thing as a safe level, and that their standards are based on benefits, based on natural stuff, not man-made anthropogenic radiation. That's insane. They're not supposed to exist, yeah? I got 5, 10. I might as well run through the last 15 of these I got there. They go fast, right? The Bandit T, 40 miles southwest, the other side of Tokyo from Fukushima. That's how bad it is. Seattle, the average person was breathing in 10 hot particles a day. So were the insects and animals and birds and mammals, too, in that case. Nuclear radiation, most carcinogenic thing that exists. It's 1 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Hot radioactive particles in Seattle at 50% of the levels in Tokyo. And Tokyo was 170 times peak weapons fallout. Government tells company to conceal information on the toxicity, radioactivity of tea leaves because of public anxiety. What a betrayal, eh? Plutonium and curium, which we don't hear them mention very often, to recirculate for generations in the seafood. Meat content will increase. Concerns over plutonium uranium being deposited, reconcentrated. The isotopes are transferred to land via sea spray, aerosols, flooding, human exposures by inhalation, food, contact. Fukushima is unprecedented in scope. Raging fires in the spent fuel pools, yet claims only partial meltdowns. Top government nuke officials warned Tokyo may have to be evacuated, which was the right moral and ethical thing to do, but the nuclear industry would have been throttled right on the spot, and appropriately. Americium-241 plutonium detected in all soil samples off the coastline. TEPCO claims it's not from the meltdown. TEPCO, of course, went bankrupt right away. It was nationalized, didn't even exist. So that was the Japanese government. Curium-242, 244 blamed spontaneous nuclear fission at Reactor 2, not uranium. And curium byproduct is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods, not iodine, not cesium. That's why they call it a curium when it melts down, right? Nuclear fission may also be happening in Reactor 1 and 3. Curium was mentioned. Well, it had to be. It couldn't have been anything else. Japanese media blackout of words, mocks, plutonium, meltdown. Blackout meant all the other media. And the last one, very high concentrations of hot particles in the Pacific. Northwest during April includes plutonium and americium. I'll show you what that looks like, because it's hard to wrap your mind around how absurd this story actually is. Covers the planet, and this model is just 20 days. And this is a continuous plume. Imagine if that was a snowstorm and the snow never melted. Then you'd get it, right? Now, got a little video clips from the day I'm going to play. I changed the back brakes on the truck today because we had to get it done. And my site is 300, and I'll play the video in a second, but to renew my site I thought was 331, but that's in US dollars. So I put 429 on my prepaid card, but that still didn't accept the money at my site. Let me play that for a second. So, because my account is past due, supposed to be $331, but all prices are, I finally noticed all prices are in US dollars. Bastards. So that worked out to 426, I thought. I put 430 on my card, but it still didn't go through today. And then I turned around and bought the brakes also, so I got to put more money on my card. I was trying to contact them guys today. They raised the prices of the hosting to $430, man. So let me play this little video coming up. Hang on, I gotta click this button. I'll put it on the big screen. This is just a quick video, just a very short video before we call it a night. Me busting my knuckles up, changing the brakes, trying to save $1 today. I got no idea how this will come up. That's how I do it, is I just release the bottom when I can swing it out of the way. But look at the difference in new brakes and old brakes. Starting to get a bit of rust on the truck, I see. Bastards. I'm supposed to be using the rubber mallet for that one, not the hard one. That's sweat coming off my head that time. Don't worry, this is really short. It'll be over in a second. Just trying to get better at my editing. There's a bit of a struggle, and then you just fold it down and put the single bolt in, and you're done, right? But I should have changed the drums, but at least we got the brakes changed anyway. I'll try to change them in the end of summer. That's the compressor kicking in. Those power tools, man, they're incredible, eh? Those things are unbelievable. Those two. I put the wheel wrench on it after just to check it. You can't move a single nut. That's pretty awesome. It saved me a lot of misery taking it apart today. And that's what's left of the brake shoes. Look at that. Holy shit, eh? I know that was super boring for everybody. But anyway, I guess I'll have to put some more money on my card tomorrow and see if it'll go through. It must be the conversion rate that I done that changed or something. Because we raised 123 from James Lucid last night. Thank you so much, because that's the only reason we got away with that today. And that was amazing. And $10 from John Curtis. And then a few donations over the last week. We put it all together. And we come close anyway to getting the site and the brakes. We got the back brakes done. I still got to do the front brakes, but I didn't realize it was American money for my site. But I'm super thrilled I got that accomplished, because you can't move the boat or the trailer with those brakes, obviously. That would have been a mistake. You would have destroyed all the... everything that was left there. And so let's come in and say goodnight to everybody. Just left. Because I know once the show's over, most people bail. Which is fine. Our poll done pretty good tonight, did it? 63 votes, 95%. Sorry. 95% got it right, says nuclear power plants should be labeled as biological weapons of mass destruction. And that's a no-brainer, right? It's a no-brainer. I'm a no-brainer. You're a no-brainer. We're a no-brainer. What am I got done here? That one. No. I got no idea, man. Don't know. Where am I? There we go. I like that one. That one there. Perfect. We do a shout out. We're going to end the poll at 64 votes. Goodbye, poll. And we had Kevin Blanche on the phone earlier. Kevin's going to call in when he gets out on the Pacific shorelines and reports on the tidal pools and the salmon out there. Chet Austin, looking forward to that for sure. Dana Nisana, thanks Dana again. Remove the battery cables for 30 seconds and replace. I got to figure out what Dana Nisana was talking about there. James Lusa, thank you again, my friend. Neryad Yilov, thank you. I see you. Port Angeles, Darlene. If anybody wants to donate, there's 2 links at the very bottom of my description. It's the only 2 ways you can donate to me. Kevin Blanche has links on his site, a YouTube channel, and links under his video, or you can contact him. His number is available there, and you can donate to him for his research that he's got taken soon. I still got to get the trailer and the boat and the truck license registered for another year. And we got to get front brakes for the truck, but we also got to get what is it? The sensing unit for oxygen for the boat, for the outboard motor. We got to get that. We got to put the water pump kit into the 9.9. We got the kit with all the pieces. We got to just pay somebody $100 to install that. I might have to try it myself. Thinker. Good night, everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. It's a great day to be on planet Earth. It's a great day to protect and fight for the species and for your futures and your loved ones. Snakes and doggies, peace. Haven't seen Stephen Young for a couple of shows. Hope he's doing okay. Adrian Johnson. I know Colette is out there. Hi, Colette. S is out there somewhere. Now, Swanee D wanted to know what the average temperatures down here. It went from 10 degrees yesterday morning to almost 100 yesterday afternoon. So a 90-degree fluctuation in just about 7 hours. Caught a lot of people off guard a bit. There was no wind for the average people. And I'm just doing a quick shout out to anybody can find in the comment section. Remind everybody to give us a thumbs up. If you're watching this, made it all the way this far in the video. And I can't remember to shout out to everybody, unfortunately. Jeff Port, but we're making progress. I'm super happy. We got DCAs halfway across Canada and left. That's halfway point yesterday or the day before. I can't remember. So that's a big deal. We got to get that desperately and start trying to fix the issues that I got. That's a big deal. I'm super excited about getting that. I can't wait till it shows up and get that started. That's a huge deal for me, folks. Obviously, I got to deal with it, right? We got to get on top of it. And we can't make any mistakes on this one. I know Richard is out there. I thought I seen Richard out there. Brian S. We're almost down to the most recent comments here in a minute. Dale P. Okay, we'll come down to the most recent comments. Horse and Buggy. Thanks, James. Appreciate that. Philip Wan, thank you. Peace where I already got. Adam the Mushroom, Messiah, I never got. Hi there. Robert, hi Robert. And everybody's watching us later. Hugs for everybody. God bless everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Well, there's not much I can do about the length of the shows. They are what they're going to be, right? It's so much work just putting it all together. Then I got to sit here at the end of the day and tell the story. It's this absurd amount of work. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I feel very privileged to be able to do things I'm doing, to come out and curb stomp the nuclear industry on a regular basis. It's a pleasure. Have a great night. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Hug your loved ones and tell them you love them. It's a good thing. We'll see everybody on the other side. Take care, folks. Yeah, good night, folks. Have a great night. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Take care.